Prepping for a big Washington speech and need some professional help? You may want to turn to a group of former Clinton administration speechwriters. They now write for some of the top names in politics, entertainment, and business. They can't name their clients, but they were willing to share their insights into what makes a good speech. You need to know the West Wing writers.
In a really crowded marketplace, best crafted stories with the best examples and anecdotes and facts are the ones that often break through.
At the end of the day, my most important title is still Mom-in-Chief.
There's a level of personal storytelling, of authenticity to those that we tend to associate with politics a lot. We're living in an age when people are really living out loud. They're really sharing more of themselves from the podium.
I think one of the great hallmarks of a great speaker is someone who really helps their audience to see things differently. And I think by that standard, really one of the great speakers, even though he wasn't a great orator in the traditional sense, was Steve Jobs.
I felt that I had let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down, that I had dropped the baton as it was being passed to me.
When you share more of yourself and are willing to sort of make yourself a little vulnerable, at least tell your story, people respond really well.
Do we want our children to inherit our hopes and dreams? Or do we want them to inherit our problems?
It wasn't enough for a speaker to have a good line. You had to make sure that that good line was 140 characters or less. But people who had great lines, we then looked and said, okay, is this tweetable?
In Romney's world, the cars get the elevator and the workers get the shaft.
This humor in Washington is really the last bastion of true bipartisanship.
Borrow money if you have to from your parents, he told him.
There's only one truly safe form of humor, and it's self-deprecating humor.
Gee, why didn't I think of that?
Say with a smile what you couldn't say, what would be too mean to say if you weren't smiling, which is if humor's self-deprecating and you're a Democrat writing for a Republican, sometimes that self-deprecation comes a little easier.
While they still have their hand in politics, the West Wing writers spend most of their time these days helping business executives become thought leaders in Washington. When we come back, a new system could make your air travel cheaper and more efficient, but it needs the FAA's blessing before it can be cleared for takeoff. We'll explain right after the break. This is Bloomberg Government's Capital Gains. I'm Peter Cook here in our Washington bureau. Air travel is no vacation these days, even when you go on vacation. There's the crying babies, the flight delays, the cost. Regulators at the Federal Aviation Administration can't do much about the crying babies, but they are considering a new system that could make the skies friendlier and more efficient and just maybe cheaper for you. Under existing technology, the FAA requires overseas flights to travel 50 nautical miles apart. A new global satellite-based navigation system developed in Canada would allow planes to fly 15 miles apart and at higher altitudes on long-haul trips. That means more efficient routes and less air resistance. United says the changes could save the carrier $4.8 million a year on fuel alone. And the system's developer promises billions in fuel savings for the industry, but there's no guarantee those savings will be passed on to flyers. The navigation system still needs to pass the FAA's stringent tests for safety and reliability. The crying baby, still no solution there. And you may have to worry more about that guy in the middle seat on his cell phone. For years, government regulations have forced him to power it down and stow it away for takeoff. Texting, words with friends, as Alec Baldwin can tell you, strictly forbidden. The fear has been, of course, that using wireless devices in the air could disrupt both the airplane's navigation systems and cell networks on the ground. But here's an early sign the ban could be easing. The FAA has been looking at in-flight cell phone use among foreign carriers. The agency reported last week it could find no instances when calls affected flight safety in Europe. Don't get your hopes or fears up too quickly. That cell phone ban is the work of the Federal Communications Commission, not the FAA. The skies over the U.S. may not always be friendly, but for now, they will stay fairly quiet if you can avoid the crying baby in 6C. And we hope that whatever your travel plans, you'll be with us next week for another edition of Bloomberg Government's Capital Gains. We'll have our eye on Congress as lawmakers try to avoid a government shutdown just before Election Day. We're on Twitter at #CapitalGains. You can always find Bloomberg Government at bgov.com. Hope to see you back here next Sunday.